Happy that all of you have spared the evening to come and enjoy the view and enjoy what I'm sure will be a very, very interesting talk by our speaker today, Professor Julia Huang. Before we get to the main talk for this evening, though, I did want to take just a few moments, say a few things about the Asia Research Institute for those of you who might not be familiar with the work that we do there. The Asia Research Institute is designed as a hub for research on Asia, and it was established as a university-level institute at the National University of Singapore in 2001 to set up a specific center dedicated to providing a world-class focus for research on Asia, especially on contemporary Asia. The work of ARI engages the social sciences very broadly conceived, including fields like history and even literature and culture. And it really tries to work on exploring some of the interdisciplinary frontiers of work on understanding major developments in contemporary Asian societies. The Institute is organized into 7 clusters, organized around major themes. The themes of the changing family in Asia. We have a cluster on Asian migration, on cultural studies in Asia, on science, technology, and society, on Asian urbanisms, and it's a cluster on religion and globalization in Asian context, which is the rubric in which the event tonight is being held. We also have an open cluster that's dedicated to really the incubation of new ideas on and trying to recruit some new staff who are developing whole new fields of research. And cutting across all of these clusters within ARI, we also have a series of geographically focused study groups with concentrations on Indonesia, Malaysia, Indochina, and Burma, Thailand. Right? So we have sort of a structure for dealing with regional issues as well as these more thematic issues. Most of the work that ARI does is to try to bring together scholars here in Singapore to develop really new conversations and new understandings of major trends going on in contemporary Asia. We do this in a number of ways. First of all, through the appointment of visiting fellows. We do have short-term visitors from 3 months all the way up to 2 years who come to us from all over the world, from different parts of Asia, from Europe, Australia, from North America, who come to bring their own sort of projects into ARI to develop new collaborative links with scholars working at NGOs. And so we work broadly with not only the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, but also we have very good connections with the School of Law, the School of Design, and the Lee Kuan Yew School for Public Policy. We also host a number of international workshops and conferences every year. This Asia Trends event is our sort of major event of working downtown and interfacing with the broader public. We also have a number of more focused academic conferences every year, and they're posted up regularly on our website. Anyone who is interested in any of the work we do at ARI is more than welcome to look for events there on the website and come join us for some events back at the Bukit campus of NUS. That's all I'm going to say about the work of the Institute right now. I do want to say just a few brief words of introductions for our speakers this evening. Our first main speaker who we've invited to come here to join us from her position at National University in Taiwan is Professor Julia Huang. She is a fellow alumni of Boston University, where I also have done my PhD, and since then she's been busy in a number of positions and has been a visiting fellow at Harvard, both at the Institute for the Study of World Religions, and the Yenshin Institute. She's been a fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, and at the International Institute for Asian Studies in the Netherlands. Her book, which there's a copy of on the table there for us want to take a look after the event tonight, called Charisma and Compassion, Chen Yen and the Buddhist Tzu Chi Movement, was published by Harvard University Press a few years ago. And part of the work that she did for that is what she's going to be extending and following up this evening and talking about NGOs and religion. She will be joining the Asia Research Institute again soon later this year as a visiting fellow to complete work on an ethnography of engaged religious practice among Chinese in Malaysia, especially in Malacca. After Professor Wang's talk, we will have a shorter presentation by our own Juliana Finnegan, who is a postdoctoral fellow here at ARI in the Religion and Globalization Cluster, a recent PhD from Syracuse University in Religious Studies, who will be following up and giving some reflections and reactions to the talks of Professor Huang. And so without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Huang to go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your generous introduction. Thanks everyone for being here. I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts. I was invited to the China Foundation for Poverty Alleviation office meeting a few years ago to give an informal general introduction about the Buddhist Comparative Tzu Chi Foundation of Taiwan. My friend who invited me and chaired the meeting introduced me and the subject of my talk to his staff with the following words. I was told by many Taiwan friends that one must understand Tzu Chi in order to understand Taiwan. 要了解台湾，一定要先了解自己。Indeed, since around 1990, the religious philanthropic organization known as Tzu Chi has been a phenomenon that has both influenced and characterized Taiwan. The largest volunteer association in Taiwan, it claimed over 6 million members worldwide, approximately 2 million of those in Taiwan and the rest mainly within the Chinese diaspora. Tzu Chi's foundation controls enormous assets, creating as an umbrella nonprofit that runs its own TV station, Western hospitals, and Soka University. Moreover, Tzu Chi has been so active in the global arena that its efforts in international disaster relief have earned the foundation United Nations recognition as a non-governmental organization, and its leader, the Venerable Zheng, an ARI of international awards, praising her as the Taiwanese Mother Teresa. Tzu Chi's success comes at a time when the growing number of groups known generally by the term NGOs have created a so-called political space around the globe and across Taiwan. The term NGO in the last few decades become a global acronym for both lay people and the specialists. The common usage of NGOs or non-governmental organizations generally refers to organized social groups which operate relatively independent of the state. As such, they are also called civil society organizations. At the same time, the socio-political transformation of the post-war Taiwan has been marked, among other things, by the changing landscape of NGOs since martial law was ended in 1987. For example, the number of registered national social organizations, Kenworthy increased from just over 800 in 1988 to over 2,000 in 1996 and to nearly 4,000 in the year 2000. This newly expanded NGO sector has also become increasingly active, pluralist, and transnational. It is worth noting that Tzu Chi has been practicing humanitarian services as a lawful civil association in Taiwan since the 1960s, 4 decades before it coming out as an NGO, and before the term NGO and its counterpart, PL nonprofit organization, become common in Taiwan. In his model of transnational flows, anthropologist Arjuna Padra uses the term idiocy to describe the diaspora of a set of related ideas, terms, images from the West, such as welfare, freedom, and of course, democracy. I would add the term NGO to the list of idiocies. As a global catch-all concept, NGOs, like a universal electric plug, would have a clear and bound shape with a shared set of practices, or do they? Tzu Chi as the grassroots of fewer than 40 women and an NGO on the global stage should be examined as 2 identities, globally and against the genealogy of the history of NGOs in Taiwan. The identity of Tzu Chi in the ideoscape of NGOs needs to be repatriated. How Tzu Chi has been situated in the public sphere in Taiwan and globally is patently intertwined with the formation of a new modern Taiwanese cultural identity. And this article tonight will substantiate this thesis. The anecdote at the beginning of the article introduces the idea that the salience of Tzu Chi lies deeper in size and tools. There is something intrinsically Taiwanese in Tzu Chi. Although many theories approach the study of an NGO by looking at the process through which it emerges and becomes legitimate, this article will examine the cultural dimension of NGO-ness by focusing on the positioning of Tzu Chi in Taiwan's public sphere from its grassroots beginning to its globalization. Through such analysis, this article will address some of the issues in the ideoscape of the NGO. What does the Tzu Chi experience tell us about the relationship between the NGO and democracy, and between the NGO and the state? To what extent might a prominent grassroots NGO be a representation of its society and perhaps obviate the application of the Western term NGO? What do people see about Taiwan in Tzu Chi? I argue that the making of Tzu Chi's NGO-ness over the last 4 decades constitutes a non-Western articulation of what is defined as an NGO. The genesis of Tzu Chi from out-of-the-way place in 1960s Taiwan is exemplary of gender, religion, and charismatic leadership. Zheng Yan's conception of doing something for the society was triggered by 2 events. One was the poor blood on the floor of a clinic from an Aboriginal woman who didn't receive treatment for her miscarriage because, according to the Tzu Chi literature, she lacked money for treatment. The other was an interfaith conversation Zheng Yan had with the 3 missionary Catholic nuns about whose religion contributes to society. The former compelled Zheng Yan to think of a way to save more lives from poverty, and the latter, the second trigger, how to organize and tap into the great number of anonymous Buddhist charity donors. On a spring day in 1966 in the remote mountains of Huang in eastern Taiwan, Zheng Yan asked a handful of tearful female lay followers who begged her not to leave them to help her realize the goal of helping the poor by founding the group. This founding of Tzu Chi enabled Zheng Yan to combine her monastic order with the deity to create a humanitarian mission. Although local and low profile in its first decade, its appeal was already distinctive. The economic autonomy of this monastic order contrasts Tzu Chi with conventional Buddhist livelihood in Taiwan, and its concrete goal of raising supplemental medical fees for the poor further distinguishes Tzu Chi from traditional alcohol and the spiritual charitable practices. In its first phase, Tzu Chi nevertheless remained local and grassroots. From 1950s to 1970s, Taiwan had no genuine NGO sector that could have engaged in any legitimate or genuine state civil society dialogue or exchange. Tzu Chi embodied political civility under the regime of civil morality, in which the dominant scheme of power knowledge appeals to a truth that civil participation expressed in the form of moral conduct is evaluated as part and parcel of national loyalty and cultural citizenship. The nationalist Kuomintang KMT efforts harnessing the image of the civil society to its nascent civil state can be traced back to the New Life movement, which was resurrected in Taiwan from its favorite Nanchang. it attempted a top-down regime of civil morality by discouraging such popular religious ceremonies of the universal salvation as rather relevant here to be analyzed, promoting instead a model of frugality based on the state ideology that money for ceremonies could be better used for help people on the mainland, Taiwan's economy, the needy at home, or local construction. In 1976, the Ministry of Interior Affairs instituted a reward code for religious contribution to society. Since then, Tzu Chi has received the first prize from the Taiwan provincial government in honor of its social contribution, 兴办公益慈善事业, running public good works and philanthropy, and has been endorsed as the country's model temple each year. These awards position Tzu Chi within the conventional domains of religion and charity, portraying it as a traditional do-gooder that exemplified the proper conduct of religious people under the regime of civil morality. Tzu Chi was left outside of the state corporatism, poised to pursue its career of 公益慈善, public good and philanthropy, the two local terms most frequently used to describe NGOs 2 decades later in Taiwan. While perpetuating its model temple reputation under authoritarianism, Tzu Chi further engaged Taiwan state by actively soliciting public land for building the first Buddhist general hospital in Taiwan history. At the same time, Tzu Chi crafted a country for a massive civil society under authoritarianism by channeling the social capital usually earmarked for building temples towards building hospitals. By the late 1970s, Zheng Yan felt compelled to build a hospital after she suffered a heart attack following 14 years of devoting herself to the Tzu Chi mission. This health warning compelled her to institutionalize Tzu Chi and to find regular funds for the mission. To the dismay of her followers, in May 1979, Zheng Yan revealed her idea of building a general hospital in Huang and resolutely proceeded to seek public land and raise funds. For a year and a half, Zheng Yan pursued different parcels of public land in Huang, but all these efforts were in vain. The turning point came in 1980, when the late President Jiang Jinghu visited Zheng Yan in Huang. With the state's endorsement, local government finally began to actively resolve the land problem. The acquisition of land for the Tzu Chi hospital shows how important a role the state played in determining the success of an NGO at that time in Taiwan. Moreover, the ups and downs in the process showed a highly centralized political structure. The first determinant push came from the central authority, the president. The NGO had to depend on favors from the top central power to pursue its goal. But why would the central power, especially the late President Jiang, be willing to support Tzu Chi? There are two possible answers to this question. One is pragmatism. Tzu Chi's plan appealed to the state as more of a contribution than a cost. There's another reason why the state was willing to help. As powerful an authoritarian regime as it was, the state would have simply ignored any humanitarian concern for the ordinary citizen and never even bothered to convert its land from warfare to welfare. Again, the regime of civil morality upheld Tzu Chi. Tzu Chi had built its solid reputation in its first phase, building on the idea that it was already a model temple by the time it proposed to build a hospital. This project would promote a two-faceted positive model, a model of social contribution for religious practice, and a model of volunteerism for the society as a whole. However, crucial the government's endorsement was to Tzu Chi's first national momentum, Tzu Chi eventually raised funds from the public for its first hospital and its subsequent rapid growth. Inasmuch as Tzu Chi made his appeal as simple and straightforward as building the hospital to save more humans' lives, the eventual completion of the hospital, as it was based on individual donations, can be said to have embodied a collective moral effort by the greater society. Two issues are involved in the embodiment of the Taiwan collective. One is the backdrop of changing state-NGO relations under liberation, and the other, the cultural identity of the Taiwanese collective that emerged in the mobilization. During the same period from 1980 to 1987, Taiwan witnessed the mobilization of civil society as represented by the rise of social movements and civil protests, and the localization, indigenization of NGO initiatives. Yet, rather than adopting global norms, the case of Tzu Chi is merely a local and indigenous process which has to do with the making of the Taiwanese collective identity. A famous story, as described in Tzu Chi literature, underlines the linking between the hospital and the Taiwan collective. During the most difficult time in Tzu Chi fundraising, in 1981, a Japanese citizen offered to donate $200 million, about 8 billion Taiwan dollars at that time, for the hospital construction. I quote, in order to show his gratitude toward the nationalist, a virtue for grievance, as the opposite of an eye for an eye. And because he's a Buddhist. To her followers' astonishment, Zheng Yan declined this generous offer, in part because of, she said, the dignity of the nationhood. I am a Chinese citizen, she said. After 8 years of war with the Japanese, it's very hard for me to accept the help from the Japanese. If the hospital is built on government's land and with Japanese money, how could we have a say in the hospital? Unquote. And Fu Tian Yi Bang, Yao Tian Xia Shan Shi, we invite all benevolent people under heaven to the land of merit. There should be more people to do good than just one person. What is clear in the story is that Zheng Yan already had the idea in her mind that the hospital was not simply a project to be done, rather it was meant to be a platform for grassroots collectivity. The late 1980s marked a watershed in both the Tzu Chi's development and Taiwan's political history. In 1986, the late President Jiang declared from his deathbed the startling news that nearly 4 decades of martial law would finally end the next year. Taiwan entered rapid socio-political change, and Tzu Chi's practical humanitarian appeal ascended to its hallmark of morality, and Zheng Yan became the moral and religious savior of the era. Amidst the intense socio-political change, in exactly 1986, Tzu Chi opened its hospital on the quiet and scenic eastern coast. Coupled with this celebrated Tzu Chi miracle, Tzu Chi's total membership increased from just over 100,000 in 1986 to over 1 million in 1990, doubled that in 1992, and doubled it again in 1994. The hospital opening therefore marked the prelude to a transformation of the Tzu Chi organization, culminating in the birth of a supersized and moral NGO. While Tzu Chi had its moral certainty from the outset, the particular timing of its success highlights its persona as the conscience of the Taiwanese society. One of the major and obvious expressions of Tzu Chi's moral model practice that particularly included Venerable Zheng Yan's powerful leadership was series of national and later international awards bestowed on her, including the 1993 nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. In addition to recognition through awards and honor, both Tzu Chi publicity leader and the government began overtly to promote the image of Tzu Chi as the savior of civil morality in the present peculiar era amid its amoral social atmosphere. Clearly, a regime of civil morality continues to uphold Tzu Chi amid Taiwan's rapid political, social, and economic change. Yet, with the rise of civil society, the regime of civil morality works from the bottom up rather than top down from the state under martial law. This change from the bottom up bespeaks a certain Taiwanese cultural identity in the current of growing commodity and burgeoning democracy. Tzu Chi's appeal to the Taiwanese women and men during this period of rapid economic and political changes lies in its ability to provide a model of stability for those seeking to regain a sense of order and control in an increasingly disorienting modernity. Meteoric membership growth and the rapid institutionalization have had significant consequences for the organization itself. One of the major changes is the gender representation. Up until the dawn of the hospital's opening, Tzu Chi was predominantly a women's group, or a kingdom of housewives in Taiwanese mass media used to call it. While women continue to comprise 70% of the membership, the organization's success in the 1990s resulted in increased male participation and accelerated institutionalization. The two trends converge with the emphasis on precepts. With the forming of the male auxiliary Tzu Compassion-based Corps, Zhenyan instituted the 10 Tzu Chi precepts, which consist of the traditional 5 Buddhist precepts and 5 more especially designed for modern life: buckling up, gentle speaking, and abiding by filial piety, no bitter chewing, no gambling or opportunist investment in the stock market, and no participation in demonstrations or political campaigns. The 10 precepts initially were meant to discipline male devotees and soon became mandatory for Tzu Chi's increasingly heterogeneous following. In other words, practicing Tzu Chi in the 1990s meant not only contributing time and money for its causes, but also leading a new lifestyle, aesthetic, disciplined, and avoiding exciting politics and money games. Since the New Life movement, the micropolitics of the Tzu Chi 10 precept has become the latest modern reincarnation of the regime of civil morality. Discipline was indicative of civil morality in 1990s Taiwan and of collectivity in Tzu Chi's case. As was the avoidance of money games and political demonstrations vis-a-vis concurrent rapid economic and political change. Parallel to its increasingly high profile was the rapid expansion of the Tzu Chi mission and its tremendous fundraising success, resulting in a near auto launch of prosperity and grandeur as it emerged as a super NGO in Taiwan in the 1990s. In addition to its impressive 5 million members at the time, it claimed worldwide and $0.6 billion in funds it claimed nationwide. The total budget for all of Tzu Chi's ongoing projects as of 1998, not including the second Tzu Chi hospital in ARI, was 24 billion Taiwan dollars, about $800 million. Moral certainty led to Tzu Chi's support from both the government and society, yet it is quite another thing for morality to work in tandem with the democracy. Parallel to the grandeur of Tzu Chi, The rapid socio-political change and economic success in post-martial law Taiwan have resulted in the proliferation of non-profit foundations as well as social welfare NGOs. As Robert points out, such a profusion of NGOs is mainly a result of legal changes, uplifting of martial law, and hence of democracy. As Michael Shaw indicates, the NGO landscapes in Taiwan has also gone through a transformation from social movement to organized legal persons, fire, and civil associations. Tzu Chi benefits from the legal change in that it finally registered as the first Buddhist and the first religious nationwide legal person in 1994. At the same time, the new identity as a non-profit foundation at Tzu Chi endeavored to adopt under the new circumstances suffered from connotations of its more traditional and old identity for married society, Gongdehui. Within their own waiting, Tzu Chi, as a do-gooder, joined the new Taiwan's NGO landscape, which was filled with the secular, local, and international service providing and advocacy groups, subscribing to a certain modern and Western NGO-ness. The fact that most NGOs are relatively autonomous financially means that they most depend on donations from the public. And increasing competition for donation among the proliferation of NGOs, Tzu Chi's enormous assets are a conspicuous target. The do-gooder image Tzu Chi held over from its last phase is still prevailing among people in Taiwan. This image has its good and bad evidence. Tzu Chi is the helper of society. Social welfare people say Tzu Chi is the traditional charity and must be replaced in time by modern social welfare. By 1994, people have begun to speak out against Tzu Chi's sites. The Tzu Chi issue was exacerbated when the conspicuous Tzu Chi monopoly encountered an uproar inspired by Taiwanese nationalism. Tzu Chi International Relief began its fundraising efforts for flood victims in mainland China in 1991. Such an initiative was a big step in Tzu Chi's internationalization, while at the same time it was the catalyst for its domestic popularity. Whether this antagonism was against China or against Tzu Chi's size was unclear, since devotees in Taipei also described the hostility they encountered when fundraising for the earthquake victim of Turkey in 1999. Moreover, Tzu Chi devotees responded to the suggestion that their organization is too big, as something beyond question. They reiterated that we are doing good, 我们是做善事. The Tzu Chi problem is a common problem for NGOs. They claim to represent the common good, but their methods are not democratic. However, for the purpose of this article, one needs to look closely to distinguish the unique Tzu Chi issues from issues common to NGOs and democracy. One of the controversies concerns accountability, which should be handled as a legal issue. Indeed, this issue concerns not only Tzu Chi and other religious foundations, but also such a reputable and more intellectual-oriented NGOs such as the Consumers' Rights Foundation in Taiwan. The issue of conspicuous size concerns Tzu Chi specifically, but it is also beyond the realm of legal solutions. The law in Taiwan, and perhaps in most democratic countries, require minimum thresholds for membership associations, assets, and defunct foundation. The two, association and foundation, two categories are usually referred to as NGO in other countries. But no upper limits are set, nor is there any antitrust law for NGOs. Overlapping the size issue of the cultural and historical aspect of the controversy. In a nutshell, Tzu Chi is the grassroots relaunch, so large and so fast that it outgrew the normalizing power of Taiwan's civil society, which has just begun to mature. The relationship between Tzu Chi and civil society is dialectic. Tzu Chi pioneered the civil society. There should be no Tzu Chi miracle without the rise of civil society. Yet we saw the strong and populous and the flourishing NGO sector brought about by a maturing civil society eventually turned against Tzu Chi. Is democracy friend or foe? In some ways, the controversies of Tzu Chi and democracy parallel the recent debate over faith-based welfare services in the United States. An infamous civil lawsuit known as the Pool of Blood, defamation case against Zheng Yan in 2003, seems to be a climax in the backlash against Tzu Chi. The Pool of Blood refers to the genesis of Tzu Chi. The family of the doctor in question, who was said to have turned the Aboriginal woman away for insufficient funds, sued Zheng Yan after the Voltaire revealed the identity of the doctor in 2001. Zheng Yan lost the civil lawsuit and was ordered to pay 1.01 million Taiwan dollars to the doctor's family. To everyone's surprise, Zheng Yan decided not to appeal. She said, "The wound won't heal if we continue to appeal." This lawsuit made headlines at the time. Family and kinsmen of the poor Aboriginal woman who supported Zheng Yan tearfully recounted the tragedy and, by extension, the miserable living conditions of the Aboriginal people at that time. Former patients of the doctor, almost all of them Han Chinese, testified that the doctor often treated them for free. The evidence showed that the woman visited the clinic and left without receiving treatment, but it was unclear what drove her out of the clinic. The doctor's family believed the whole tragedy was fictional. The case was handled strictly as a legal matter. The issue of ethnicity was not raised. Perhaps the stakes were too high, like the elephant in the middle of the courtroom that no one wants to talk about. The Pool of Blood lawsuit summarizes much of the Tzu Chi issue. It is less a legal issue than a case of history retold in a modern setting and through a variety of mass media. It is a rerun of a series of socio-cultural memories referencing a now-savvy NGO that everyone in Taiwan can relate to in one way or another. What is unique in the Tzu Chi issue is the continued high attention it receives from the public sphere in Taiwan. What lies at the core of this attention and perpetuation is perhaps the idea that Tzu Chi's brief history captures the Taiwanese imagination in its process of modernization. Tzu Chi espouses modern NGO-ness, while Taiwanese civil society frees itself from political and economic constraints. People in Taiwan like to talk about Tzu Chi in the same way anthropologist Clifford Geertz interprets the Balinese and their cockfights. The cockfight is a deep play of Balinese culture, and people come to cockfights to look at the representation of themselves, saying something of something, as Geertz put it. Societies, like lives, contain their own interpretations. One has only to learn how to gain access to them. In my view, Tzu Chi has come to the access point in Taiwanese cultural identity. The September 21st earthquake in 1999, which killed over 2,000 people and collapsed over 14,000 houses across Taiwan, marked another turning point for Tzu Chi. Its volunteers auditioned and devoted the relief work for the victims, including those who were trapped in the most remote areas, outshone the government's efforts and impressed the society. The vitriolic criticism against Tzu Chi's international relief works disappeared as its thousands of volunteers persistently and powerfully involved in the organization as a pillar of Taiwan's civil society. The about-face that Taiwanese society showed to Tzu Chi after the quake marks the unique position held by this NGO in Taiwan's public sphere in the late 20th century, a nexus of the local and the global. Its cross-border charitable work won its leader an increasing list of international awards. Its growing network among its overseas branches and with international NGOs indicates that Tzu Chi might be moving in the direction of transnational advocacy network. Although Tzu Chi's focus tends to remain within the bounds of traditional charity rather than advocating for such modern issues as human rights. While becoming increasingly global, Tzu Chi continues to be a quintessential local concern for Taiwan. Many social scientists continue to view Tzu Chi as a monopoly that claims more than its share of social welfare donations. Despite Zheng Yan's adamant reiteration of her apolitical stance, the press never ceased to be interested in her position in Taiwan's political spectrum. Tzu Chi's border-crossing practices are in part a realization of the Bodhisattva's universal ideal of relieving all beings from suffering, regardless of ethnicity or nationality, and in part a result of the fact that Taiwanese transnationalism straddles two or more countries. Such deterritorialization of an indigenous charity eliminates the government's diplomatic predicament in sharp relief. Rather than being antagonistic or even repressive toward this NGO, the government of both KMT and DPP and LKKMT attempts to recapture Tzu Chi by collaborating with, if not riding on its coattails of its outreach beyond border. This article looks at Tzu Chi as it has evolved within and along with Taiwan's public sphere. It shows that the positioning of Tzu Chi's NGO-ness is itself a process of freeing Taiwan's civil society and crafting a Taiwanese cultural identity, market value, and democracy, while being simultaneously local and cosmopolitan. As Taiwan was experiencing modernization, Tzu Chi itself changed from grassroots organization to a large and global NGO with branches within the Taiwanese diaspora and UN recognition. At the same time, the regime of civil morality for Taiwanese NGO-ness was experienced by Tzu Chi shifted from a model temple to a welfare infrastructure cause, to micropolitics of civility, and to deterritorialization and globalism. By the year 2000, Tzu Chi had become a nexus of the local and the global. As Robert Weller argues, its organized charity is one of Taiwan's religious responses to capitalism and the island's status of non-nation, non-statehood. On the other hand, both government and society attempt to re-territorialize Tzu Chi, even as its practice expands globally. The hype surrounding Tzu Chi captures the Taiwanese imagination. The career of Tzu Chi's NGO-ness, from grassroots to globalization, against a shifting backdrop from the vision of civil morality to a public sphere, when hand in hand with the crafting of Taiwanese cultural identity, modernization, and the positioning of Taiwan on a global stage. The deterritorialized diasporic and transnational world, as presented by Tzu Chi, seems to have, in turn, facilitated the production of the locality for Taiwan. The more active Tzu Chi is on the global stage, the more it clarifies the locality of Taiwan, and the more irony it casts on Taiwan's ambiguous nation statehood on the territorialized world map. Tzu Chi and Taiwan stand is a critique of the failings of modern nation states. Thank you very much.
So I'm now Hannah Dr. Finnegan come up for her reflections and remarks.
Soka Gakkai International, which is an international NGO that's recognized by the United Nations. The ways the group has navigated the messy tangle of local, national, regional, and global bear similarities and differences to the ways that Tzu Chi has done so, especially in the ways that both groups have used the global ideascape of the NGO to root themselves in a place, or to produce locality, if you will. It's this NGO-ness that I'll focus my comments on tonight. Some of you may have noticed that the subtitle for the talk tonight shifted recently from notes from Taiwan and Malaysia to from Taiwan to the globe. And this change seems apt to me as one significant element in what Professor Huang has described as the global infatuation with NGOs is the theory of democracy that it often implies. To wit, NGOs are the cornerstone of civil society, and a robust civil society is necessary for a fully functioning democracy. Professor Huang's research shows, however, that the relationship of NGO to state to democracy is never obvious, especially in Asia. But even as the unevenness of local interpretations may call into question the descriptive value of NGO as a global model, specific NGOs like Tzu Chi and Soka Gakkai continue to harness the power of NGO-ness to strengthen and legitimize their global projects. So tonight we go from Taiwan and Singapore to the globe, but then also back. One of my earliest experiences with the Singapore Soka Association highlights some of these dynamics. It was June of 2007, and I was watching some 2,000 Soka Association members practice for the National Day Parade at Marina Bay. Gakkai, who's a longtime member who I was with, she leaned over to me and said, a little bit out of the blue, you know, we don't try to convert Malays. Implicit in her comment was the recognition that I might see the group's participation in NDP in the wrong way, namely as an opportunity for religious proselytizing rather than as an act of good citizenship. As most of you probably know, the NDP is a highly publicized celebration of Singapore's independence. It's part display of military and government strength and part spectacular cultural performance. Along with the People's Association and the Ministry of Education, which are both government organizations, the Singapore Soka Association is one of the cornerstone participants in these cultural performances. They've put up hundreds and sometimes thousands of volunteers every year since 1986. In light of Gakkai's comment, how should I understand the prominence given to this religious group in this national event, especially considering the fact that the nation in question is one that's heavily invested in promoting religious harmony in its diverse populace? I asked Gakkai this question, and her answer to me was simple. Our participation, she said, is about culture, not religion. In this context, culture describes what all Singaporeans share, while religion is what makes groups different much larger than the Singaporean nation, to the global Soka Gakkai community of bodhisattvas of the earth. Members don't see a contradiction between culture and religion, as they see their different affiliations, family, community, national, global, as concentric platforms for the cultivation of humanistic values. Values that are to them, by definition, universal. This attitude is similar in some ways to Tzu Chi's embrace of service as a way of being bodhisattva. A Singaporean member might privilege her sense of being Singaporean on National Day, but she's also aware that all people already contain bodhisattva within them, and therefore all are equally members of the community of bodhisattvas of the earth. As I said before, the Singapore Soka Association is a branch of the Soka Gakkai International, which is a lay Buddhist group with some 12 million members in more than 190 countries and territories. The Soka Gakkai, or the Value Creation Society, was founded in 1930s Japan, and it's based on the faith that chanting the name of the Lotus Sutra, or Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, can bring true happiness by changing one's karma in this very lifetime. The group has its roots in 13th century Japanese monk Nichiren, who's known both for his belief that all people were able to achieve enlightenment and for his fierce intolerance of those who disagreed with him. For Nichiren, propagation was, quote, an act of bodhisattva-like compassion and the highest form of service, which is something that members today still believe. In its early years in Japan, Soka Gakkai also took a confrontational stance towards the broader public, and the group was controversial both because of its aggressive proselytizing and because of its incursions into politics. In recent years, much of the group's global success has resulted from distancing itself from its controversial past, and, like Tzu Chi, it experienced remarkable growth throughout the 80s and 90s. In Singapore, the group got its start in the early 60s as a collection of mostly Japanese expats, and it grew to some 100 members by 1972 when it filed officially with the Registry of Societies. The group soon appealed to ethnic Chinese, especially young people and women, and today the group claims around 30,000 members across 7 centers and 1 kindergarten. Its growth in Singapore has resulted from a number of factors. First, the group has self-consciously and publicly embraced a set of putatively universal cosmopolitan values, including its NGO-ness. Second, it has ably accommodated itself to the social space slotted for religious groups in Singapore, both by embracing dominant cultural values about religion and by maintaining its commitment to being non-political. And third, quite unlike Tzu Chi, it has loosened its cultural and religious ties to its homeland, which in this case is Japan. The group's growth in Singapore has also come alongside some accommodations to a government that monitors religious harmony in its multi-ethnic and multi-religious population. The government does so in many ways that many of you are familiar with, including by prohibiting religious leaders from commenting on social and political issues, by regulating the registration of certain religious groups, and by enforcing limits to religious proselytizing in general, and prohibiting it almost entirely when it comes to the Malay Muslim minority, a restriction that forms one of the backdrops to get its claims about not proselytizing Malays. Land is apportioned in a way that's intended not to show government favoritism towards any one group, and many less formal avenues for promoting religious harmony also exist, like interfaith exhibits and meals and service projects, community walks, these sorts of things. I asked Yoga Amaya, who's a deputy director of the Ministry of Community Development, Youth and Sports, about some of these programs. And he drew a number of overlapping circles in the notebook to explain. And he said, I quote, "These circles are your own space. Indian, Chinese, Muslims, you can do whatever you want, promote your culture, your food, whatever." And then he pointed to the space where the circles overlapped and said, "This common space is where Singaporeans come together to work and play. This is common space. So what the government wants to do is expand the space where you can do what you want to do so your identity can coexist with your national identity, with your Singaporeanness." End quote. Mr. Amayappan did not use the language of civil society, but in an idealized sense, this is what he was talking about. the non-governmental realm that sits between the state and the private sphere of the home, where individuals freely associate, where public opinion is formed, where democratic rights are exercised. In the case of Singapore, the boundaries between the state and society are blurry, as Weller notes is true in many Asian contexts. For this reason, models of civil society don't quite do justice to the situation on the ground here, and this is especially true in the case of religious groups. Further, the formation of public opinion for these groups is circumscribed by rules about what is possible to say. Yet, members of Soka Gakkai themselves do not tend to see these restrictions as curbs on their freedoms. Indeed, the group has operated largely free of government interference as a result of its carefully cultivated public image and its relationship with the government. The Soka Association embraces rather than challenges national values. So, members participate in NDP as citizens. They do not proselytize mores. They are non-political. And this embrace of national values has been one of the group's main ways of entering the public realm. The group has been invited not only to participate in the NDP, but also in Chingay, in racial harmony month walks, in charity road races, and many other government-sponsored events. Mrs. Lim, an assistant director in the People's Association, has worked with Soka Association on many events since the early 80s. And she said the government enjoys a good working relationship with the group because of members' willingness to take on tasks with energy and good cheer, and thus serve as, quote, a shining example to other Singaporeans. Government officials have visited the centers, including former Prime Minister Goh, who helped inaugurate the group's new headquarters in 1993. And the group has received numerous commendations from the government, including the Singapore Youth Award for Community and Youth Services in 2005. Thus, like Tzu Chi, Soka Gakkai can be seen as sort of a moral exemplar, a non-political moral exemplar, at least in the sense of not being oppositionally political. At the same time as the group roots itself in this local context, members reaffirm their status as an important part of a global religious group, in turn reinforcing the, quote, production of locality through the cultivation of a shared global ethic. Like Tzu Chi people, Soka Gakkai members also promote a humanistic Buddhism that respects the basic dignity of individual human life. Within Soka Gakkai, the constellation of humanist Buddhist values is codified under the rubric of global citizenship, promoted through the person of the charismatic leader, Daisaku Ikeda, who has traveled widely for many years, has issued numerous peace proposals, and has met with many world leaders and high-profile public figures. Like Chang'an, Ikeda has received numerous awards from secular, academic, cultural, and social institutions. Though quite unlike Chang'an, Ikeda has had global aspirations from the moment he assumed the presidency 50 years ago. For Ikeda, a person's cultivation of Buddhist Soka Gakkai values, or being a bodhisattva of the earth, is synonymous with becoming a good national citizen and a humanistic global citizen. Ikeda has described the qualities of a global citizen in very general ways. Global citizens share the wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness of all life. They respect cultural difference. They share, quote, the spirit of working for the common people. And they have an imaginative empathy that extends to those suffering in distant places. This language should not seem so foreign to us at this point. Ikeda frames global citizenship not as a religious pursuit, but rather as a universal one that describes all people who strive to make the world a more harmonious and peaceful place. The more the group aspires to embrace these universal values, and the more it attempts to participate in what Newman has called the global stream of humanity, the more effectively it's able to carve out a space for itself in the increasingly crowded public spaces of Singapore, and to appeal to citizens and sympathizers who are also receptive to these same values, however big they may be. Members in Singapore articulate the contributions of their own vision to the public sphere through reference to universal values like humanism and freedom. And, as Jose Casanova has argued, questions of the common good can increasingly be defined only in global authority in local contexts. This is part of the deterritorialization and reterritorialization that Professor Huang was discussing. Universals are, of course, slippery placeholders. Freedom and humanism, to say nothing of civil society and NGO-ness, look rather different depending on where you're standing, as anyone who's visited Singapore, Taipei, and New York will tell you. Tzu Chi actualizes these global values through service projects, while Soka Gakkai actualizes them through vast cultural and academic networks. Yet both seek to position themselves in what Professor Huang, following up ARI, has described as the ideascape that includes democracy, freedom, civility, and NGO-ness, even as both groups re-territorialize this ideascape with their own understandings of what it means to sit at the nexus of the global and the local. As I was reading and thinking about Soka Gakkai and Tzu Chi, I kept coming back to a quote from Gayatri Spivak, who said, "The universal is what we cannot not want, even as it so often excludes us." Members of Soka Gakkai strive for this universal, while offering moral, cultural, and social frameworks for integrating people in both local and transnational contexts. Yet struggling to claim the universal that so often excludes us, means understanding that democracy, freedom, civility, and NGO-ness are not unified global projects but contested ones. We may agree, for example, that religious freedom is crucial, but we may not agree on what limits to that freedom should be. We may agree that NGOs are vital to the creation of a vibrant democracy, but we may not share an understanding of what that should actually look like. And thus the call for genealogies becomes urgent. The fact that these questions are hotly contested calls attention to the flip side of talk about civil society and civil society organizations. Suzanne Rudolph has argued that there is no guarantee that civil society will, in fact, be civil. And the struggle to re-territorialize these emergent global spaces populated by NGOs is not limited to those groups who seek peace and compassion and tolerance, like Tzu Chi and Soka Gakkai. Surely, organized crime and terrorist networks also fit some of the descriptions of NGOs, if not our shared ideascape of NGO. Many people and groups are excluded from these spaces. And as the political scientist Clifford Bob has argued, quote, global civil society is not an open forum marked by altruism, but a Darwinian marketplace where legions of groups vie for scarce attention, sympathy, and money. End quote. The suspicion and occasional animosity with which Tzu Chi has been regarded, or the Tzu Chi problem/issue, is a case in point here. In the attempts of both groups to exercise judiciousness and self-awareness in their incursions into the public sphere, highlight the reality that these spaces are never neutral, especially towards religious groups. By way of a quick conclusion, and also to sort of get the ball rolling with questions for our speaker, I wanted to sort of take one step back and reflect on our roles as scholars and students and citizens circulating in some of these same non-neutral spaces. Professor Huang makes the point that many of these issues are not legal issues, but instead cases of, quote, history being retold in a modern setting and through a variety of mass media. We here, too, engage in these retellings. In the case of NGOs, helps us understand that in spite of our own sometimes inflated sense of academic self-importance, we're often simply characters in the stories of others who may have much larger audiences. I found this to be true in my own research. My presence among members here as an American who had come all the way to Singapore to do research with this religious group helped clarify for members the local group's global importance. This was not my story, but theirs. So among my many, many questions for Professor Huang, I would also hope that in our question section you could reflect a little bit on your own role as a scholar and non-practitioner in some of these dynamics.